Okay, let's call this meeting to order. And we're here to have a discussion with the school committee about their budget requests for the upcoming fiscal year.
Yes.
And then,
Emery, do you want to call the school committee meeting?
Yes, we'll call the school committee meeting to order at 6:46.
I forgot Kathy's not here, so I have to take notes. Okay. All right, so we have a couple of handouts. This is the standard one-sheet PDF of the FY19 budget, and then some additional work that the school department has been doing, given some recent changes. So if you recall, the original difference between the requested budget and the town parameter was $297,439, and that includes the additional appropriation, thankfully, from the town for $200,000.
could I be there?
Oh, yeah, okay. And so we went back to the table as the leadership team, and we did, in fact, actually have a resignation in our special education department. So we reworked the caseload at Granby Junior Senior High School, and for this year, if there are no changes in student enrollment or student placement, we would be able to not replace that position. So that salary would come out of the operating budget. And in working with Chris and the statements that were made at the first joint meeting, where the technology infrastructure may be considered a capital request, that it had not been in the past. So the leadership team talked about that with the school committee, and we have decided to move the network infrastructure upgrade for Granby Junior Senior High School out of the operating budget and into a capital request, and working with Chris to hopefully move that through that process. So it's not software, it's not devices, it is infrastructure, it's wiring, it's that kind of stuff. So it could be a capital request, so we're excited about that. So the net of it is that the real difference now between what our original request was and the town parameter is $185,638. That's down from, as you remember, something around 600 when we started the process. So we've made a lot of adjustments as we've gone through, and just want to talk about how to move the process forward now, with that being the final number for us.
I got a question.
Really?
Yes. This one, maybe you've heard this question before. Have you checked with the MSBA about this infrastructure project? It's a capital project. They have that special program. Have you submitted this to them and see if they
Which
cover
special
it?
program are you referring to?
Whatever the accelerated program.
Okay, so it's not an accelerated repair, not roof or windows, not boiler, so it wouldn't meet the criteria for accelerated repair, is my understanding.
Do they have any other program on?
So this is actually tied to an E-rate reimbursement. So at the...
Excuse me, an E-rate?
E-rate reimbursement. So we work with a consultant to get reimbursed from the federal government for a portion of what we spend in communication and digital network. This amount is based on a project that was proposed 2 years ago and has since been put in the budget, but has been changing because of the new building and the infrastructure needs not being in that amount anymore. But it is to work with a consultant to fund the infrastructure upgrade for Granby Junior Senior High School with the hope of having up to 40% of it reimbursed. So working with Chris and the capital, this could be reimbursed, I believe, up to 40%. And we've never had the opportunity to apply for the reimbursement because it is an amount that has been taken out of the budget every year because we just can't afford it. So we can't afford to move the proposal forward if we don't have a funding source to back it up. So the potential is that it is 40% of that, but we can't move the project forward if we don't have it in our budget.
So what you're saying is that we have to spend the money to get the reimbursement. Is that fair to understand?
Yes. Yep.
Is it a reimbursement to the town?
That's a good question. E-rate,
Town uses the rate too, right?
I'm not sure if the reimbursement goes to the town. And David asked, should he be here? And I said, no, it'll be all right. I think it's a question that we can certainly ask if we do pull it out and then move it forward through the capital process.
I'm just gonna speculate. If the E-rate, and I think the town is using E-rate as well, if that is true, if the E-rate agreement is through the town, it may go back to the town.
Right.
I'm not 100% sure how that's gonna work. It comes back, obviously, that's the good news, but I don't know where it goes.
Anybody got any questions?
Except the obvious, in terms of the difference of the 185 is, where do we get it from?
Well, also, I mean, there's more than this 185, the 41 is still there as your expenditure. So, I mean, that money has to come from someplace too. You're not intending to do this for next fiscal year?
We would be intending to apply for this fiscal year. That's why it's in the budget.
So our conversation with Chris is that there's a special town meeting in August. We would include this in that special town meeting. We would include this as a capital expense, provided it goes through the capital improvement committee and then becomes a warrant. It would be then added to the special town meeting in August.
Okay. Okay, tell us about the 185. Tell us about the 185.
What about the 185?
What are you gonna do with it?
So what would come out of the budget if we didn't have 185,000?
Yeah.
So our presentation through the public hearing was that we would be reducing in many items that, and I've explained this before, we are now at the core of the program of education. So we are talking about 0.25 in the music department, we are talking about JV sports, we are talking about a first grade teacher, and also a reduction we have a shared ELL and intervention teacher. So those are the major positions that would be eliminated. So there isn't anything left for us to reduce that doesn't impact significantly the educational program. There's really nothing left. I really don't know how to put it any other way.
So by taking a first grade teacher out, is that somehow still okay with the number of kids?
No, it's
No,
not.
it's not.
So what are the numbers?
So the class size, I believe, is 40. I didn't bring that with me, and I apologize. The class sizes would be about 22, 23. And in the primary grades, that is frankly unacceptable. You know.
And we also have to qualify that we're not really done with our school choice acceptance yet. So we don't know whether or not those numbers will change, and the only way it's gonna change is upward. So we know where we are right now, and we know it's not gonna, well, knocking on the wood, it's not gonna change downward. So if it goes up, it's gonna be even more unacceptable. So just to refresh our memories, and I'm just jumping on
Yep.
on your territory, but the K through 3 we consider that as early education. And the class size becomes important in that case. And, you know, we did try to play with those numbers even before we finalized our budget to see whether or not we could squeeze it in there. The challenge is that we are still not sure what the final numbers are gonna be for school choice, one. Number two, even in the current case, we are beyond that 20 threshold that we set for ourselves for those classrooms. So it may currently look at on the low side, but that's basically to make sure that the quality in the classroom doesn't deteriorate.
Are there state guidelines for number of students in the class?
State doesn't, Massachusetts doesn't really have guidelines for anything beyond kindergarten. So no. However, we go by precedent and what the other school districts across the state do. And typically 20 is the threshold, and that triggers either a split if it goes beyond that, and in most cases it triggers paraprofessional coming in. If it reaches a certain, 23, 24, it just triggers another one of those paras for some of the districts depending on what they decided to do. But definitely it's not really, at least in most of those districts that I'm familiar with, it's not really an allowance without some additional expense because they want to make up for that additional number of students by adding a paraprofessional to be able to help the teachers.
So a paraprofessional is a teacher's aide?
Yeah, and so, you know, when we look at what is the difference between a paraprofessional and a teacher, at the youngest age, you know, to have a high quality instructor in front of students, one of the things we're looking at is basically building foundational skills with students. And paras can certainly support, and we appreciate all of the work that paras support, but they don't do the direct instruction with kids. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that the quality of instruction in classrooms at the youngest levels prevent students from falling behind by grade 3, so that we're not looking at students who may need catch up to stay at grade level, or may need special education because they haven't had exposure to high quality instruction because the numbers have been too big. And so by 3rd and 4th grade, then we start looking at, or 4th, 5th, and 6th, we start looking at numbers more around between 20 and 25, because students have the foundational skills, and then they're using their foundational skills to actually learn. So they're reading to learn and not learning to read. And that's a different kind of instruction and can really allow a different type of organization and a different type of time on learning with a teacher.
So, not including parents, what's our current teacher-student ratio throughout the school system?
Well, it depends on the level.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, I'd have to get out the numbers. It's typically about 1 to 14, but when they do that, they include our interventionists in that number, so the number gets deflated.
Okay. And what do you mean by they reducing interventions?
So we have interventionists that are staff, and so they're included in how.
As a teacher?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're categorized as a teacher. Then one of the things I did was, I added up enrollment.
Yeah.
I added up basically everyone that was listed as a teacher and a para, and I came up with a ratio of 1 to 6, which is 1 to 6.7 is what it actually came out to be. That's why I was curious about the paras and
Right.
of that.
Yeah.
So it's about 50-50 teachers and paras?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. No.
Just a point on that, on those numbers, those are not the latest numbers.
Okay. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going with the data I
So, and
have.
the other thing I think that's
But I
important
mean,
is.
the point of the matter is that if you look at a 1.65 ratio,
Yeah.
that's equivalent to some of the finest private schools in the country.
But that's not true if you're including paras. And it's
Okay.
also, I think we have to be careful because that may, and I don't know who you added, but it may include speech and language pathologists, it may include
I just
OT,
went straight by
PT.
grade 1, grade 2, paraprofessional. I
Yeah,
went
so you'd
straight
have,
by
yeah, you have to
titles
take the
that-
paras out.
Paras titles that
Yep.
you guys did.
Yep, yep.
Uh,
Some
at
of those
least in the
parents were
comic book.
assigned to a certain student? Some of those paras are assigned to one or two students
Yeah,
only.
that's
so
why,
they don't-
that's why I'm asking the
Yeah.
question about.
Yep.
So the actual ratio of teacher to student is 1 to 14 is where we're at.
I think at the, yes, and as in the primary grades, but as we get up into the 4 through 6, it's probably more like 1 to 15, but I would have to pull I'd have to pull that from the state website.
And after that, where does it go?
So, after that, it depends how are you gonna ask the question. Are you gonna ask the question, based on grade level? Or are you gonna ask it by course? Because we have AP coursework, courses that are offered that have between 9 and 15 students, and then we have general courses that have between 20 and 25. So it's kind of, the idea of a ratio doesn't really make as much sense.
Mhm.
And then there's combined classes.
Right.
7th and 8th grade together for classes. So you can't really solidly count just grade level.
Okay.
But I would remind people, I think, that we made some significant reductions since I've been here, particularly at Granby Junior Senior High School. The reductions have come at that level. And I think we can't forget that has been occurring over time. I think we had 83 staff in 2010, and we're down to 62 or 3, I believe. So we've been making reductions. And again, I just can't say it enough. We're at the point where we're at the core of what we do.
Mhm.
How many school choice students do you have in the first, second, third grades?
I wish I had known that you wanted these kinds of answers.
I have your presentation open.
Oh, do
want to
you?
see it?
Yeah.
Here, you get those numbers.
Thank you, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
So, school choice.
If it's in the drive, you can get it
Yeah,
on the drive.
I have the
Yeah.
drive
Find
open.
stuff
I
too.
think I actually have a printout, just want that instead.
Sorry. Actually. I got to your drive with dog stuff, sorry.
So John, as Cheryl's looking for that, what are you trying to understand?
Well, I thought that you had said something like, when you were looking for the extra third grade teacher, that you didn't want to go over the 27 threshold, something like that.
D4?
Yeah. And I guess what I'm wondering is this.
Second grade teacher?
Yeah, for this year.
Yeah.
And what I'm wondering is this.
Well, actually, it wasn't the threshold. I didn't say that that's where we would be if we did not have three classes, and if we had 2.
Yeah. If there are a lot of school choice students in there, the question I have to wonder about is that, is it in fact costing us more
It's a good question.
than we're getting? Because if you're not willing to go to 22 students or 23 students, then all of a sudden, if that's because you got 5 students, you get, what, $25,000 for that? And then by the time you hire a teacher and pay for all the fringe benefits and everything else like that, we're losing money. And plus, the thing is that, and then as a carryover from year to year, for example, you said you may accept even more because you think you got all this room in the classes. Well, then you kind of built in a bias against any kind of cost savings because you got all these school choice students.
If you'll
So let me
excuse
give
me,
you-
I'm gonna go get my own computer.
Let me give you one example from this past year.
Yep.
And Cheryl helped me which grade that was. One of the grades, I think it was kindergarten or first grade. We had a good number of school choice students that wanted to come to Granby. And they were going to add to the numbers in such a way that we were going to have to look into adding another teacher. So we said no to them. We did not accept them. So the school choice calculation becomes more viable and more reasonable when they become supplementary to the numbers that we already have. But we made a conscious effort of looking at the additional numbers coming our way to see whether or not, on their own, they were going to increase the number of teachers in the school district.
These are the numbers we had.
So your question is a good question, and we can always keep it in front of us as we're making all those decisions. But this year alone, we had a good example of a good number of school choice students trying to come into Granby, and we said no because we do not want to open another class. So there has to be a balance there for us to consider them.
And it's causing a little bit of a downstream effect, because I have friends with kids that are young that live in other towns that wanted to try to get their kids in on school choice. They were turned away. They were looking to buy a permanent home and chose to move to a town that they were accepted in, because they were living in Springfield. They didn't want to put their kids in school in Springfield, tried to school choice their kids into Granby, were turned away, were considering buying a home in Granby because they wanted to come and be part of the new school, K through 6, brand new. They bought a home in South Hadley because they were accepted in South Hadley. And so we've lost doubly. We lost a school choice student, but we also lost potential, townspeople, because they went, and I know that they're not alone. That's an example of what's happening. There's a lot of talk out there about the new school, and people are excited because they think Granby is finally starting to come around and focus on the schools and education with this beautiful school that we've done, and the signal we put out with voting in the new roof. People are talking, and it's positive as opposed to negative, and so you don't want to be out there now that we're turning away school choice students, because that sends a different message. And you don't want to, people are out there and they're looking and they want to move into your community where good schools are being exemplified.
That's a bit of a leap.
We can't be selective and say, I do intend to move there.
No, and I understand that, but I'm saying I know personally at least one example, and probably 2 or 3 if I were to really go out. People are looking, they have young families, and they chose to move elsewhere because they were turned away. And it's not, I know it's not all concrete, but it is.
Yeah, I mean, if they just moved to Granby, they'd be in the Granby school system. This is a little bit of a leap, I think.
Well, you can
claim that people are
you
moving
can claim,
because
you can just.
A lot of
where
parents
they're not.
nowadays
A lot
want
of
to put their
people-
kids in schools.
There have been always some examples of people who first were here as school choice, then they became town residents. And from several years ago, my son's class, we had 3 or 4 people who actually moved from Ludlow and South Hadley. So, and we had the opposite too. But
But that's much different from saying that because they can't get in school choice, they're not going to buy a house here. Buying a house here is the way that you avoid school choice
But they're
altogether.
trying to
You
get
just
their
move
kids
to
in
school
the
system.
ground
That is the primary purpose is to get the child here. But that becomes moot, right? Based on the example that I just shared with you, we were not really trying to accept students in a way that would cause us to open new classes. That was a conscious decision. But even beyond that, we can look at what school choice means for us. We know that we are one of the, we have always been, and we still are, one of the larger receiving schools. And those numbers reflected the decline in our enrollment the last so many years. Doesn't mean that it cannot change, and as Jen is saying, the new school has been attractive for a lot of families to send their students into Granby as school choice students.
How many school choice total? It's estimated at the moment.
So, I am not getting 17, 18, I only have 16, so I'm still searching. In 16, I was actually in a document that Kathy sends me on a regular basis.
That's the ballpark.
About 120.
So about 20% of the total enrollment, because we have about 600 people, 589 in the enrollment now, going down a little bit.
I have this 2017, 2018. Is that the document you're looking for?
No, because that's current
That's- okay.
enrollment, and it just has the openings that we ask for
Okay.
every
Okay.
year. It doesn't have, so we don't track
But you're averaging 10 per grade.
I don't think we're averaging 10 per grade.
Well, if you
There
have
are some.
120.
So here's how we look at school choice. If we have a low enrollment, resident enrollment, then those are grade levels that we can open more school choice, and maybe there are 10. But it isn't across the board, we open 10 seats. We take a good look at where are there spaces where it would not, in fact, trigger an additional teacher. And so,
But I think the point is not for accepting additional students beyond the 120. The point is that the decisions already made have put you in this position. That you've got, if you have 120 school choice and you've got 12 grades, that's an average of 10 per grade. So there's at least 10 in some grade, because that's what the average is. So you've already pushed beyond, you already pushed into the area of having an extra teacher. To
So
accept more now,
maybe this would
okay,
make it
it's
a little
great,
more
you can
clear.
add more, but
our school choice receiving tuition is $662,813 in June of 2016. So it is well more than the teachers that would be required for one grade.
So I'm not exactly sure whether or not we're trying to uncover or discover something about school choice, but any school district is free to go either way. Any school district can say, you know what, we're not gonna participate in school choice, or they can say, we're gonna participate in school choice. When you say yes to it, you basically open it both ways. If you close it, you close it both ways. And districts that have been in a situation where they could say, you know what, we have enough of our own and we don't really need it anymore, they shut it down. They don't accept students from
So
from other
their
districts.
students can't go out either?
As far as I know, once you say no to school choice, you don't receive and you don't send. You just don't participate in school choice. Am I?
I don't
Wrong.
believe that's true. I believe
That's not
parents
true.
have the right to choose. Participating in school choice is in. It's tuitioning in. Parents will always have the opportunity to choose to
To
attend.
go out?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we
So-
could potentially lose a lot more than
Right,
just saying.
so
no
our
and
outgoing tuition in 2016, and again, I didn't update it for this year because we haven't finished this year. Total is, for 2016 was 310, I believe.
310.
Outgoing. And that's what I'm trying to make the argument. If we can keep kids in and then also work with our school choice in students, then we can net, over $1 million. And that I think is what people have to understand. We're not talking about $40,000 in school choice. Our net is our incoming school choice receiving tuition is $662,813.
That's
We
the
cannot-
62 exceeding tuition or 62 total?
That's our receiving.
Okay.
Yeah, so the net is the 351. We've got to work on the net. We've got to keep kids in and work on getting kids to come.
One thing I understand, correct me if I'm wrong about this, is that the school receives additional funds that are not reflected in the town budget. Is that true, and if so, how much?
Like what?
I don't know, that's why I'm asking the question.
So best practice in budgeting is inclusive, and you have everything. So the budget that we give you has our federal grants, if that's what someone's referring to.
No, yeah.
It has our revolving accounts.
Mhm.
It has our state grants. And you will hear the school committee talk about, there's been a reduction in the federal grants, there's been an elimination of a grant program, we've already hired a staff member, so we're having to move money in our budget to cover that. So we don't do that.
Okay.
So if
So
somebody
we're
is
seeing-
saying
we're-
somebody,
We're seeing everything that you're saying.
yes,
What was your question? I didn't catch it.
It was my understanding that there's additional funds received by the schools aside from what is shown in the town budget. And if so, how much and where's it come from?
One of the problems, I think, I'm sort of half along, I understand what you're saying, and I'm sort of half there with them. You show us a budget, $8,839,000 change, which is what it was before you. that's actually probably what was approved,
Right,
but you've got some other changes coming.
right.
But on top of that, you have an actual budget of everything, which includes your grants and your revolving funds.
Correct.
What, in the revolving funds, what determines, this sheet of paper doesn't show it.
Right.
Maybe it does, maybe it's on the backside, I was looking at the front
So
side.
all funds will be inclusive of your.
Okay, so you're showing 328 grand of grants and 827 of revolving. How do you get to 827 on revolving? What goes into that?
Okay.
School choice is obviously
School
one of them.
choice is a large one. Revolving is also athletics, and lunch,
How about the after-school,
and the after-school.
the after-school?
And the after-school is a run through our partner, our collaborative. So we're not really involved in running that anymore. We're basically collecting tuition and paying our partner to provide a service.
Now, a year ago, when you were doing the budget, you said that the number that you're using as your estimate for school choice revenue
Yes,
was based only upon the kids that you knew were gonna be here.
correct.
That you deducted the graduating
Yep.
choice students. How did you calculate whatever the number is, because it doesn't show it here?
Right, yep. So we did reduce school choice a little bit. We were concerned that we were gonna be overly optimistic.
Are you talking a year ago or this year?
This year. We were concerned about how attractive the new school was gonna be. And we're very pleased with school choice enrollment and interest. But we had a very large 12th grade this year of graduating, that in order to increase your school choice amount, you have to cover the students that are leaving. I believe there are 12 school choice students in the 12th grade. So that's a lot of new school choice to get in 1 year. So we reduced our school choice anticipated revenue.
By, got any idea how many students it was?
I don't remember how many students off the top of my head.
Because if
No,
you
it wasn't.
eliminated 10 out of the 12, that's a
I mean, are you
sizable
saying,
number.
like, are we reducing our school choice so that, it looks, no, we're not. We're being very honest about what we anticipate coming.
Okay, all right, so at the end of the day, though, you're supposed to have 185, 638. Where do we get it from?
Well, let's just go back for a minute. You're making choices. We understand that. But your choices seem to be now to say that, for example, you want classes of a certain size, rather than saying, well, we can actually deal with classes of a different size. So you have 3 instead of 2, or 4 instead of 3, or whatever the situation is. And you have kind of built into that, for example, if you want a dozen more students and you get a dozen more first graders, that's great, because you already assume you're going to have 3 teachers, and then the
Right.
12 looks like it's extra. But what that's actually done is built in the need for 3 classes for the next 11 years. And that's sort of the part of the past decisions, which you have not that much to do with, perhaps. But all the students that are there, every time you're looking for an extra student, we wonder why you're not asking how many students are already there that are causing us to need this extra class, rather than how can we get more students in to justify even further the need for the extra class.
Now, are we still talking school choice?
Yeah.
So if once you admit the students, you can't just say, hey, you know what, this year the class is gonna be too big, sorry, you have to go somewhere else. So that's a decision that you make at a point in time.
Right. But you don't
And
have to increase the
Once
size.
they're,
You
once
don't
they're
have
in,
to-
they can stay in as
They
long
can
as
stay in until they.
But you're not
if they
required.
choose to
Right.
stay.
But you're not required to increase the number of classes.
You're not required to include.
You're not required to go from 2 to 3 classes.
What he's saying is that if we accept those students into into school choice for first grade, where we're asking for a teacher, apparently, we don't care. We're not gonna hire a new teacher. We're gonna let those classes be 25 or
Right.
whatever number of students.
I get
So
you.
that's his point.
Is that, because that's what I understood as well, is that what you're saying, John?
Right. The fact that you have some room in a classroom this year, so you take in a school choice student, leaves you open to the possibility that some people will move into Granby with students in that class, and then all of a sudden you'll say, oops, we're over the limit, we have to add a third class. When you've got, the reason for it is not because people have moved in, the reason is because you've got all these school choice kids there. You haven't done anything, you can't move those school choice students out, but you haven't been doing any anticipation in the planning for running the school of what happens if you actually have kids in the school.
So I think-
And it comes down to something which I think be hard for a lot of people to understand, and that, well, we don't want 23 kids in a class instead of 22 kids in a class, or we don't want 23 instead of 21. That's a very, very hard concept when the end result is that you take in some income over here, but you're also extracting a great deal of tax income from the people. Their
Yeah,
taxes
so
are very
I
high.
think we just reverted back to our conversations from before. We are not making those decisions with cash first. We're making those decisions from an educational
Understand that.
perspective first, right?
I understand that.
And then we're trying to align it with the budget realities in front of us. So the numbers that you are seeing right now for, say, first grade, 43. The choices, which is a choice that were made, we decided to have 3 classes. But we're at the same time telling you that if currently, based on the numbers that we decided to have 2 classes only. So given that we have, at least at this point in time, we have 43, it's going to be 22 and 21 students in best configuration in those classes. And that doesn't really align with whatever we decided that would be best for the students in those classes. What you're saying, I hear you, because then it becomes a budgetary calculation. And you're saying, well, for 2 students, you're about to cost so much more. I hear you, I understand that. But those 2, 3, at least based on the research, make a difference in those classrooms. And we're trying to avoid the impact of that. If we go with that educational approach, and you don't have to agree with that, then we come to the 3 classes where we have 15, 15, something else, what is it, 15, 15, 30, no, 14, 15, 16. Then now our effort becomes, okay, since we have those 3 classes, how do we basically get our money's worth? Is there a way for us to increase those numbers in those classrooms? So our calculation actually turns into budget as well, but first we start with the educational concern, then we turn to the budget concern. So we're not really trying to fill those classes because we're trying to show large numbers that we cannot, do away with. We're saying if this is the number of classes that we have, say first class this year, is based on our conversations, our educational principles, then how do we potentially add more students so that the cost of having those 3 classes goes down?
Right.
Well, the enrollments are dropping over the whole Commonwealth.
Actually, in Western Mass, not in Eastern Mass.
Yeah, Eastern side is
Well,
different.
Well, to call a spade a spade, in Eastern Mass, they're exploding, they're building schools, they can't build enough schools in Eastern Mass.
Right.
This is a
And
Western Mass problem.
We don't draw any kids from Eastern Mass, I bet.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
So-
actually, what you're seeing now is a trend of if people can telecommute, then they are coming this way. So we're hoping that, with rural
That's moving in.
expansion, right,
That's
right,
different.
right,
That's different. That's not school choice.
right. No,
No, but at the end of the day, enrollment is enrollment. It's inclusive of however many students you have. And if you look at our numbers, if you look at Belchertown's numbers, if you look at South Hadley's numbers, looks like things are stabilizing. And we know that our capacity is way more than what we had, and given that we have a school, a brand new school that is attracting all these students who are likely to stay throughout, we are trying to take advantage of that.
Right. We can't solve the whole school budget problem within the finite,
No, that's
what
absolutely true.
the school contribution is. And you guys are all here tonight, in essence, asking that we as the finance committee support going to the town and say, give another $185,000. And that's the bottom line. The question for us is, in essence, the overseers of financial prudence in the town is A, do we got it? And that's why I'm asking, what do we have, where it might become available from. But then the other real question is, okay, this gets us through this year. And we have that meeting on June 14th, we're all gonna get together and talk about the future of the town and what we're really gonna do and all that kind of good stuff, you know. So it really boils down for us is, do we support this if we have the money? And do we support it as, you know, last time, this year only, but we gotta do something radically different here going forward. The issue for us, to a certain extent, is, and I'm not saying necessarily it's this school committee, is that we've heard that before from the school committee. Yep, this is the last time, guys. We're gonna basically change from here on out, and it's, you know, and I've been on this committee now for 4 years, and for 4 years running, I've heard that exact same promise each and every time. And the real chagrin for us is when we bring it up the following year, and again, it's not this school committee, I'm just saying the school committee in general, when we bring up the following year, we've actually heard, oh, we never said that. We're like, geez, we must all be nuts, because we all heard it, and it doesn't come around. So, from my point of view, I'm not sure we have the 185 in the town budget, in terms of funds, available funds, that type of stuff. So what's the mechanism in terms of doing this? But also, what assurances do we have that indeed this time will be different?
Well, I'd like to flip the question a little bit and say, what can the finance committee suggest to help us so that we're not in this position next year?
Well,
Because, I mean, I'm a lifelong resident,
Yeah.
and I've been sitting through town meetings since I've been old enough to vote, and I get it. And my husband and I, we're paying taxes through the nose. I get it. But what is the town of Granby and the finance committee going to do to help us?
Mhm.
I mean, that's why I'm here.
Well, that's why
What happens is we
Right,
run
we
into
have
a question of educational priorities versus financial priorities.
Well, that's
We
what
can
I'm
give you a
saying.
very good thing, don't hire the first grade teacher, don't
Yeah,
hire the second grade teacher.
But
You saved $100,000, you're
Well, I'd like to
Happy-
know what the town
more
wants
than
to
happy
do
to weigh
besides just
Well, that's
raising
it, that's
taxes
it.
or spending from
Well,
wherever it's called.
that's the reality of why we're gonna have that meeting on June 14th, you know, to talk about this. I mean, I personally have got some ideas. I think, frankly, you know, you talk about, at the end of the day, it boils down to enrollment. Enrollment equals tuition. Increase enrollment, basically,
Or
we're
town
all
revenue.
good.
Or increase the town revenue somehow
all-
so that there's
all
more
that-
money
all that
to
type
give
of
to the
stuff.
budget.
You know, I'm in the world of entrepreneurship. That's what I do. I
Well,
start,
great, let's come up with an awesome business for
I
Granby.
start companies. And personally, I think, you know, one thing that is, you know, when you're in the world of entrepreneurship, you start with a crazy idea that basically
I'm all about it.
is
Let's do
just-
this.
Just that. Have you guys thought about internet high school?
I didn't even hear what you
Have you
said.
thought about internet high school? I teach in 2 universities, and I teach pretty much primarily online. And one of the universities I teach at has got a big, large percentage population of international students. And so I know from being in that arena that there are lots and lots of international students that really want to have an American high school diploma from an American school because it makes getting into American colleges way easier. Have you thought about, and I keep preaching that the only way any organization, whether it's a town, a business, you name it, not-for-profit, all that type of stuff. And I've headed up not-for-profits, I've headed up the of a bank, all that type of stuff. The only way you get to profitability is you cannot cut your way to profitability. You can only basically cut your way to profitability for the short term. You've got to figure out a way to grow the pie. This town did great when we in essence had a public-private partnership. The dump was a public-private partnership. We need to figure out other public-private partnerships to basically grow the revenue of the town, because no factory's gonna move here, Amazon's not gonna come, we're not adjacent to a high school, we don't have really cool old mills that can be retrofitted and for startup companies that would increase the commercial tax base. That ain't gonna happen. The only source of money in this town is residential tax base, period, end of story. With a declining enrollment of school people, meaning a larger fixed income population, and that's why you've seen at town meeting not as much support for what the school wants anymore. That's why you guys have seen that setback. So the only other way we can do this is figure out public-private partnerships that work. One possible public-private partnership is internet high school.
So
Is that a
That's a
possibility?
fantastic idea, but
we had an opportunity, what was it, last year, or the year before, to do a partnership with Germany.
Mhm.
But we lack any of the network infrastructure that would ever make that possible for us.
All right, now, so,
We have a $40,000 we've been trying to get for 3-4 years just to have a data manager.
yeah,
So I
so
think your
I mean, but
describing is awesome,
right now, there are a number of startup ventures in the world of online education.
Tons,
Yeah.
you've met with a bunch of them.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the companies that I own, or have a partial ownership interest in, basically plays in the online world. I own a company called Grayboard. We developed a add-on to Blackboard that basically makes teaching gray and more gray classes easier in Blackboard. So, make a long story short, there are a number of private companies out there that would, among other things, love to be able to say, hey, we have partnered up with Granby High School. This is an official Massachusetts high school diploma, that type of stuff, and you revenue share, just like we revenue shared the dump. We had a deal with Waste Management in terms of that. When I think about thinking outside the box in terms of what the town can do and stuff like that, in terms of the realm of public-private partnership, I think the school, that's the thing that really comes to my mind. Is that something you would all be willing to explore? And not saying it's going to work.
of course.
Right.
I'm just saying that's something that would be
I don't think
worthwhile.
anyone wants to shut down the schools, and if there's a way to help it, then that's, I think, any.
Because
one of us
virtual
is open.
enrollment is enrollment.
So
So
I
how do
like
they-
the way you think, Rob, but here's the way I go into stuff like that. That's an idea, just one
Oh,
idea.
no, 95% of the stuff fails. But that's why you do a lot of
Fails
it.
or succeeds,
Ideas.
but I'm sure we can come up with a lot more than just
Yeah.
one. And I'm not sure that we should shut the door for any other type of potential investment in this town. There has to be some other way for us to look at it. And at the end, after we look at it, if we say, you know what, there is really nothing else that will come here because we tried it, that's one thing. But I don't want to really shut the door just because we make an assumption that Granby is not going to be a viable town where any business, no business would want to invest in.
It's not that no business will want to invest in it, it's that the structure of the town is such that if a business moves in, whatever they build is what you collect in property taxes, that's it. There's no business partnership.
Well, you can have restaurants, you can have your additional taxes from your restaurants, you can have some other type of warehousing and all that, you can have additional taxes on that. So we have to look into all those
I mean,
possibilities.
no, those are all the possibilities, but in terms of the school, because that's what we're here talking about. Yeah, and what comes down to me is, on principle, no problem at all with the 185. But A, do we got it?
Right.
And we really don't, okay? And B, you're asking us to support it, fine on principle, except we've gotten burned before. So what's different now?
This is
So
the third year in a row we've had this exact same
Same conversation.
Same idea. Rob's been preaching this to the finance committee and to anybody else who is meetings with for 3 years, and it always seems to take a crisis or an evolving crisis to get to the point where people actually pay attention. But he's I think exactly described what our dilemma is that sure, there's stabilization fund money, the operational stabilization fund. You can ask to take money out of there. But year after year, that's what's happened, and year after year, your budget just keeps getting higher and higher and higher. And we might ask, for example, the enrollment has gone down about 25%, looks like, in the last 7 or 8 years.
By the way, even this year, our budget is lower than last year.
And so the question is that, has your overhead gone down by 25% in the last 7 years? I'm not talking about the I'm not talking about the teaching staff, I mean the overhead.
Look, I mean, again, we don't have the details to be able to discuss those. We're willing to discuss those. I don't think that we ever sat down with the intent or the ability to discuss that because we always got lost in these conversations. A couple of corrections to what we are talking about. I don't think the school committee ever said that they would not ask for additional amount because we don't know what our budget is going to be. You know, some of those conversations may have been in front of the camera, but you know, it's a recent occurrence, so maybe not. But what we said was, we will not, if we don't get it from the finance committee, we will not get it from the finance committee because remember, we had conversations where you guys agreed to add certain amounts to the budget, correct?
Well, we agreed to
So-
support.
This year.
It's
Right,
not us to
support.
get, not us to
So
get.
what we said was that we would then, if we can get it through our conversations, and if we cannot agree, then we have to go and ask the town. Because at the end of the day, the town decides on any one of these monetary matters. The difference is this. This year, we started these conversations with some understanding that we were first seeing reduction in the gap that we always talk about in the school budget. There is an effort, even today, the reason why we're here is to show that, hey, you know, whenever the opportunity arises, we take it out instead of saying, hey, we have $297,000 and then it becomes a surprise. We want it to be transparent and bring it here to you guys. So if we are saying that next year, when this fiscal year ends, the town will have no free cash whatsoever, there will not be anything that we're not aware of that, then yes, the only thing for us to do will be go to the town and say, you know what, we either take it out of stabilization or we're going to ask for an override and just do something like that. We are trying to avoid that this year, and that's why we're asking for your help to do that. If you're saying, you know what, no way in our estimate of the budget, there is nothing that we can spare $185,000, that's part of the conversation. We're not going to, you know, you're not going to hurt our feelings. We're not going to be, you know, we're not going to be happy going in front of the town again and just talk about the fact that we could not agree on something. But we agreed that if we're having these conversations with good faith, and then we get to a point where we cannot agree, that's what's going to happen. But I don't think we over forfeited our right to be able to go to the town and ask for them.
Oh, no.
if we
Oh,
cannot
no,
agree.
and you know, the finance committee has always been going out of our way to make it clear that we are an advisory body only. We have absolutely no authorities, no responsibilities in the town. We are, in fact, the only body in town that by the bylaws has to be neutral. Nobody else is required by the bylaws to be that. As a matter of fact, they can't be because people run for election, they have agendas that they get elected on. You run for the school board, you have an agenda that you get elected on. And so you're not required to be completely neutral. The finance committee is the only one by the bylaws in town that's required to do that. So that's what we do, and that's why we have no powers either.
Okay.
We don't get to do anything. All we do is make recommendations.
I would never have thought that the finance committee was neutral. There's always a very clear bias.
No, isn't that, well, you know what?
Against what? Against
very-
spending money?
That's very,
No, I can. I would
that's-
be willing to take a poll in town meeting the
That's-
next time you guys stood up and say who thinks the finance committee is.
no, that's very interesting
neutral.
because we hear from a lot of people, and what we hear is that we have been going overboard in favor of the school committee. We had this override 14 years ago now, 10 years, 12 years ago of the $305,000. That override is dedicated for 1 year by law. The finance committee has held the line on that for the 13, 14 years in a row under a great amount of pressure to say, no, eliminate that. Go back to the required minimum net. And not only that, this year, we're going to be spending, if this 185 doesn't pass, $900,000 more than minimum required spending. $900,000.
By the way, that's a great point. That's another conversation that we should have because of a couple of reasons. One is, I think that's including the retired teacher health insurance.
Absolutely.
Which we don't know where it is, so we can't tell you exactly what that number is since we never see it. Since in 2015, the town passed on including that amount in net school spending. It's not part of net school spending, and we can't claim it, right? So we have to see what that is. We have to.
You can't make
then
it go
we can-
away. It's not that you can't claim it.
It's
You
not a matter-
can't make it go away.
John, when you budget for something, you want to know what you're budgeting for. So every year we're having this conversation. We're going in good faith, and we're taking a sheet that says this is your contribution to the town because this is your in-kind services. We had this conversation a few times. You told me that, hey, you don't want to see that in-kind thing in actual because it may work in your favor some years, it may work in our favor in some years, or the town's favor. And what I told you is that when you're budgeting, you want to see your estimate, you want to see your actuals. We may be doing a horrible job estimating whatever it is. It's good to see, right? That's part of budgeting. That's part of learning through your budgeting process. So this retired teacher health insurance is almost the same thing. It's somewhere. You're right that somebody's paying for it, and we're not denying that it is being paid for our retired teachers. We just take it in faith that you tell us it's $400 and something thousand. We don't know what it is and where it is.
Don't you get a copy of the cherry sheet?
It's not on the cherry sheet.
You
It's
don't?
not on a cherry sheet separately because
No, well, it's available online at the Division of Local Services. And one of the charges on there is the amount of it, year after year.
retired teacher health
Retired
insurance.
teachers' health insurance, there's no secret.
Okay, we'll look for it.
All right, but look, back to the main subject.
I've got one thing I want to bring up. The way you're talking, Emery, I think you feel that there's some chunk of money someplace within the town that the finance committee could say, hey, go and spend it.
At the end of the day, our budget is gonna go, whether we go and say, we want an extra $185,000 from stabilization override, whatever it is. Or as, again, the collective committees or finance committee and the school committee agree that we're gonna add another 185 to it.
Where's it gonna come from?
The town is gonna vote for it and they're gonna say,
No, they aren't, because there's only so much revenue, so you have to make a projection to the state of your revenue
Right.
and your expenses, okay? When we go to a town meeting, we try our darndest to have a balanced budget. So if we have a budget that's balanced, or,
Yeah.
all right, with $185,000 not included, because
Yeah.
that was not submitted, all right? So if at this point in time we change it, the only way we can change it is to say we've got some more money we aren't talking about.
so are we saying that we're not gonna have any free cash next year?
The free cash next year depends upon what happens this year.
That's what I'm saying, so are we saying that whatever we budgeted this year is basically making us balanced and we're not gonna see a surplus next year? Is
No,
that
I'm not gonna say that, because I don't know who's gonna spend what.
Well, based on the last so many years, around $1 million.
And most towns would say that you should end up the year with 5% of your gross budget being in free cash, year after year after year. And when you don't have that from one year to the next, you're not running the town right, and
But that's a different conversation, Bob. Now you're
No,
telling
no,
us,
it-
no, it is.
No, I
Because
mean-
now you're saying that there may be some surplus, but it's not good practice to do so.
Wait,
I'm not-
hold
I'm not-
it.
no, I'm not-
Hold it. The school committee has a budget process that's entirely different from the rest of the town. The school committee is the only one that starts with the idea that we want to be able to do exactly what we did last year and move forward. Nobody else gets to do that. Everybody else starts with a budget cap and then has to live within that or make a request for additional amounts of money. This level service budget, as a matter of fact, has been absolutely rejected at the town level for all the other departments. That has been brought up by the departments and has been absolutely rejected. You're the only ones who start with that concept. We have a total amount of money that we have projected coming in. The total amount of money that we have projected coming in could be more or less after the year is over. The expenditures could be more or less. There is a free cash, but the idea of that, the ton of free cash, the other thing we would hope that you have paid attention to over the last number of years, we said the same thing, is that you look at the town budgets and the town budgetary process. It happens in two big chunks. Most all of it happens in June and May at the annual town meetings, but then there are special town meetings throughout the year. And God knows, school committee has asked for quite a bit of money in special town meetings over the years. So if you had no free cash, if you started off the year assuming we're going to have no free cash coming in, by the time you got to the springtime, you would be in big, big trouble. Because every year, that second piece of what happens in the town, as reality catches up with projections, would kick in, and then where's the money gonna come
40,000,
from?
for example.
The average, when we eliminate what we've taken in from the landfill revenue, which almost sunk this town because the town got to depend on that for its operating budget. You eliminate that, our free cash here averages about $300,000 a year.
No.
Yes.
No.
I could show you, I'll send you the numbers. I got 20 years of records.
As you guys said, I mean, the numbers are available online. How does this year, we're talking about $1.4 million that we
Right.
just voted to go for the roof.
Right, and
And that wasn't free cash, that was $300,000?
no, I didn't say there's $300,000 every
We
year.
average $300,000.
I said you can look over the history of Granby over the last 2000 on. We averaged 300,000. Take out the landfill revenue. We averaged about $300,000 free cash.
Mr. Chairman, I might add some clarification to the 1.4 million for this current
Yep.
fiscal year. Approximately, in round numbers, $1 million of that free cash is a net result of paying off deficits for school choice and other special revenue funds in 16. So we made that money back in 18. The actual free cash number is pretty much what John says. It's about $300,000 to $400,000 every single year. So it's not 1.4 every single year.
What was it last year, Steve, since we were?
This past year, we got certified for $1.4 million.
How about the year before that?
Off the top of my head, I don't recall.
Was it about 1.1 million?
It could have been. But there's a number of things that affect that number. The true net free cash number that we're generating from the difference between excess revenues or expenses not being where they are, that's what the real free cash number truly is. These anomalies that we might get from year to year can't be relied upon at all.
So can we rely upon it one more year to
Well, let's-
include
well,
that?
And theoretically, this is what's gonna happen for fiscal year 18, all right? We're gonna have free cash certified in 19 as a result of the end of fiscal year 18. It's likely that the true number will be around $400,000. Furthermore, when we go into town meeting in June to finalize this budget, theoretically, because we have a balanced budget, our net cash, free cash for the following year is going to be zero. We don't know what the total revenues are going to be. We don't know how much money we're actually going to spend. But to anticipate $1 million plus every single year of free cash is foolish.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we need to anticipate $1.5 million or over $1 million. What I'm saying is that that's been the trend the last so many years. Whatever the source is, whatever the coincidences are, it's been the case. So what I'm wondering is, in all those numbers, if we're suddenly saying that next year we're not, you run these numbers, and I appreciate that. This year, do we think that we may be able to add the $185,000
Well,
to the school budget?
That's the subject of tonight, and the question comes down in terms of the finance committee is can we, and if we can, where does it come from?
It can't come from future money.
Right.
No, it's gotta be, what do we have? And so what's our current, Mr. Treasurer, what do we currently got?
Can the
Well-
town take a loan for $185,000?
No, you can't
For
borrow for
you can't borrow
operations.
for operations.
And you
That's
can't
the-
use whatever estimated free cash you might have next year, that you can't count that money yet.
Right.
You can't use that
Yeah.
free cash for next year.
Mhm.
The only possible solution to fund the $185,000 right now is to either take it out of stabilization, and I don't recall how much money is in the general purpose stabilization fund off the top of my head. I apologize for that. Because that's the only practical way, or a override. There is no other additional funds available. Where else are you gonna get the money?
What's in stabilization fund right now, John? Remember?
In the general purpose, I don't have the figures, but it's in the $500,000 range, I suspect.
It's.
I mean, there's
it's
enough,
somewhat
there's
under
certainly
that.
185,000 in the
Yeah.
general
There probably
purpose
is,
stabilization.
but that's the only
And,
point.
and where are you expecting to get the 41,000 for the infrastructure?
From the capital stabilization. That's gonna go through capital improvements, so we're gonna have to, you know, just like every other capital project, it has to come out of there.
Everybody understands this is real money, all right? It's real money.
I mean, is there something called, like fake money? I'm not sure I understand
Well,
what that means.
you know, it's.
Trump would say so.
Yeah, it seems like it,
My
because.
taxes are real.
The 41,000 is the recommendation of Chris Martin. So, you know, working with Chris to find an alternative to the general operating budget of the schools, to work with the town to partner and figure out,
Yeah.
can it be a capital? I think
But I mean, let's say
we understand
let's
it's
say-
real
let's say-
money.
Let's say we say, yep, it's capitalization, awesome, that's great.
Right.
That's still 41,000
Yep.
in addition to the 185 coming out of the, in essence, same stabilization fund, except we're just basically putting a different envelope on it. So really, it's the 240, or the roughly 240, that we're talking about, are in essence 50% of our stabilization fund.
But you see, this.
If you in
Can I
your.
just let, John, if you allow me, we can't look at it that way, Rob, and here's the reason. We're taking it out of operational budget, right? We're moving into capital because Chris said that this should be
No, I
actually
get
capital,
that,
right?
yeah.
So, just like any other capital
Chris
request.
is saying,
it's gonna
Chris
go-
is saying as an accountant, this is the correct
Yeah.
categorization. But in terms of cash flow, it is coming out of, for all intents and purposes, the same chunk of money that we have. So it's really the 185 plus the 41 that would be having to come out of stabilization absent an override. And the odds of getting an override are slim to none based upon recent history. And the problem is that if we have 500,000 roughly, I think actually a little less, in stabilization fund, this amounts to 50% of our stabilization fund. From our point of view, as finance committee, is that fiscally prudent to recommend to the town? Because for us to support it, we need to basically be able to say to the town, we think this is a good idea.
But is
And
there
that's
a-
the discussion we need to have.
Is there a building stabilization or I mean,
There are
if that's
three-
general
There
purpose
is.
is one, aren't there other stabilization accounts?
There are 3 stabilization funds.
And they are?
There's the general purpose, there's the building stabilization, and the capital improvement.
So this would, I'm assuming, come out of capital or
Well,
building?
first,
You mean the 41?
Yes,
It would come from capital.
okay.
For-
And so
for-
what's left in capital? I'm just curious.
yeah,
Yeah, I can find it, yes, it is.
well, the capital, there are a couple things that we thought you had heard, but maybe you haven't. There's a possibility, we have not borrowed all of the money that would be our share if the school costs come out to be where they were. And rather than have to go back and rebond, which takes a lot of money, for this extra $1.5 million, the intention along is that money in the stabilization funds would be used to cover that, rather than ask people to rebond it and go and raise taxes. Again, we're already in the top 10% in the Commonwealth, for Pete's sake. And so there is enough money in the stabilization funds to pay for that $1.5 million that's there. Plus, something has got to be done with West Street School. And that's either to renovate it or to tear it down or to sell it. And the committee that's working on that has had some preliminary discussions and had a lot of consultants in. And best guess right now is that it looks like it's going to cost the town upwards of $300,000. And that has to come out of someplace too. And the only place to take that from is either current taxes or for the stabilization funds. And this is part of this idea that everything that happens in the town cannot be decided in May and June. It's just impossible. Things happen. Things break. Things grow. You need money later on in the year. And luckily, Granby has been able to count on having some money coming in. There's $300,000 or $400,000 a year. So we know that we're not going to have to go into a deficit position and have a negative. Does everybody remember the years where there was negative cash flow? Does anybody remember that? Do you know that's possible? A negative cash flow.
When was the last time we did negative
In
cash
the
flow?
90s, like the early 90s? Negative? It's like 91-ish, 90s.
Do you remember?
with them there, yeah.
Must be
With
former
free,
my
free,
time as treasurer, I can tell you that.
Well done.
It was supposed to be a big deal.
It may have been before 1989
And
too.
that's one of the things.
Here's the other issue in terms of using up our stabilization fund, especially with the percentages that we're talking about, is that the rating agencies look at things like our stabilization fund and level of funding of our stabilization fund in terms of what our bond rating is. And if we go down, our interest rates are gonna go up because our ratings will basically take a hit. And so we need to be aware of that as well.
Forgive my naiveness, sorry, Jen, but this is more than just a school issue. This
Yes.
is an overall town issue.
Well,
So
this is the thing.
Well, can I just finish my statement before I lose my train of thought? But it's an overall town issue. So the town as a whole needs to look at ways to increase revenue overall.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? So those conversations need to be happening, so the school conversations then become
No.
easier, right?
That's what that June
Because
14th meeting is about. It's
because-
about basically overall revenue for the town
we-
generally.
we're
Not just the school.
Not just the school.
We're,
not
we're
just schools,
essentially
but
beating a
town.
dead horse with a stick at this point. Like,
Yeah.
we get the 185 as a gap. Like, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
And we understand the stabilization funds are coming down. But that's not all entirely the school's fault.
Oh, no, this
You
is
know,
not a
and
fault, this is not a
If
fault,
it feels
not a
as
fault
if-
thing.
You know, like you said, the finance committee is supposed to be neutral, and maybe not in this meeting, and I get that, but I feel the, you know, the reluctance to even, to agree to it.
We've had this artificial construct in the town for a long time of school committee and schools, here you go.
Yeah.
You do your thing. And we, finance committee, will not pay attention to your budget as long as you basically stay within, come on. And that's changed over the last 3 years. It basically, kind of when I showed up, it first started happening. So what's happened is, because of the pressures in terms of the school budget and stuff like that, you've had to basically break out of that model and come to the town and come to us and everything else. That never apparently historically ever happened. But that's actually, having that artificial construct is really not a good thing at all. And the reason not a good thing at all is that in any organization, if you're going to be fiscally prudent and manage your budget well and manage your cash flow and stuff like that, you have to look at all the divisions, everything. You can't basically say, oh, these folks are off on their own and we're not going to pay attention. And so it's actually, in an ironic sense, good that this has happened because now we are forced to look at the overall picture and not just basically these artificial construct of segmentation of schools separate from everyone else. It is all part of the one picture. So to answer your question, yes, this is a town issue, not a school only issue. That said, the reason that it basically, to a certain extent, focuses more on the town, on the school, is because the school budget clearly is the majority of what the town
It's
spends.
the only thing here.
So,
Let me expand on this for just a minute on one point, because I want to make sure something else is also understood. We agreed earlier to recommend, and we've actually built it into the budget, for $200,000 on top of the $305,000. We've never done that before, for those of us who are certain that we're anti-school in the budget every year. But we made clear, or we tried to make it as clear, that that extra $200,000 and our agreement to put that in is not because we think that belongs in the budget. We're putting that in there because we think that as a transition amount to get through what the study next year will be about the total town finances and where the money's coming from and where it can go and how it should be split between the town and the schools.
and more
That,
importantly,
that
how else-
while
how else
that
we get
happens,
more money?
we were willing to actually recommend to the town this extra $200,000 as a transition amount for that year. We do not think that should be there in future budgets. We didn't think it would be in this budget. It's a transition amount in our mind. So that's where we're coming from on all those budget questions. We are not happy with the over expenditures, and we have a mechanism to control them in the town government pieces, but there's no mechanism for the schools.
Well,
So
first-
can I would like to speak to this. We're talking about an artificial construct in how the town tells the schools what the school budget should be. The town is telling the school department that you need to live within the parameter of net school spending plus 305, that's it, that's all you're gonna get. I have never in my life worked at a place where a discussion has not occurred that these are the needs of the district, these are the needs of the children that are here, this is how we teach the children, these are the expectations of the parents who send their children to our schools, and that this is what we want in our schools. And that as a result of that conversation, and a leadership team that sits around the table and has that conversation about how we can best educate kids, that's the budget that gets put forward.
Have you ever-
And so, if I can finish.
Sure.
An artificial construct is how the town is telling the school department what it can spend. Because we are telling you there's a structural gap in your budget every year because that doesn't exist.
No, the artificial construct.
Here's the-
It's both ways.
needs to go away.
And I'm so excited that June 14th we can sit down and peel apart some of this. And that, yes, thank you for now recognizing that, you know, the 200,000 is the transition. But this is going to continue to happen because if you think you can manage a school district on net school spending, no one is managing a school
Yeah,
district on net school
the
spending.
only-
No one.
The only
And so-
solution is to figure out a way to grow the pie.
Exactly.
And-
And so
and the-
we've been talking about enrollment, and we're talking about if we can have 81 school choice seats open because we've invested in our schools, it's $410,000. The requirement of teachers hiring for that is 2. So you talk about enrollment and growing the pot and getting people to come to Granby, invest in schools. Because people will come, and I know you think that's artificial and maybe it's pie in the sky, but $410,000 by hiring 2 teachers, I think is a pretty good investment.
You guys think about that.
Here's what probably hasn't happened. You probably haven't worked in a town that ranks in the bottom quarter of house values in the state.
Yes,
but
I
in the
have.
top- but is also in the top 10% of the tax rates in the state. That's the
And
reality
so the question
of
is,
Granby.
with the pie that we have, how is it that you think we can survive on minimum net school spending? How is it that you think we can run a school district on minimum net school spending?
We didn't say that.
Yes, you do.
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. We got the extra 305,000 there, and we got the extra
3%.
and we got the extra 400,000 in there. You have built in this year, before we did any of the rest of this, 305,000 plus 418,000 of this year, I think it is, for retired teachers' health care. And the fact that other towns count it in and we don't, does not mean that the money is
No,
not spent.
Not every
Not
other town
spent.
counts it in there, John. we
Yeah,
have-
just about every
No,
other town does.
125 communities don't.
John, I mean, if we're gonna, honestly, when we come to these meetings, you know that the one thing that I try to do, we all try to do, is to really present whatever we know to be fact. If there's correction, we're open to that too, but we're trying to be as transparent as possible. When you say that, and if anybody bumps into this conversation, you know, on GCAM, and they say, well, you know, we're the only town that actually doesn't have that. That's not correct. Probably Steve would remember it. Here's the history on that. Schools that did include retired teacher health insurance in their budgets before the ed reform, which was in 1993, they kept it in there. In 2015, there was a window for the remaining towns to say we want to include it in net school spending. They said, okay, just include it in there, and we're gonna take your numbers that way. But we can't have it both ways. There are about 200 school districts that do not have, it was 200, 190 something, 100 and something school districts that do not include retired teacher health insurance in their net school spending, the way we are including. And here's a danger about that. A couple of years ago, Palmer kept an independent reporting inclusive of that. And they got fined because the state said, these numbers that you are telling us are net school spending are not the way you're supposed to be reporting them. And I'm not saying this to scare you guys or to scare anyone. I just want us as a town to do the right thing, to talk about these in the right way, so that we find the right way to handle those costs. We cannot get rid of retired teacher health insurance. We cannot say that today's students, today's children, should actually be held accountable for the health insurance that we decided to give to our teachers who've been here for years and retired eventually. we have to really separate those. I'm not saying that it's not coming from the town's coffers. What I'm saying is that the more we go into the direction of adding all those and making it look like, hey, you know what, to educate a student, this is how much it is, and include in there the health insurance and all that, okay. But at least, let's just use the correct figures so that everybody understands what it is.
All right.
One thing I've never heard from the school committee is ask the question, if the 400,000 were included in what we reported to the state, what would the finance committee recommend to the town? Would they recommend that the budget include that or not include that? That has never been asked,
You mean this year or before?
any year, any
John,
year.
until this year,
There
we
you
did
go.
not even know that the retired
Well,
teacher health insurance.
you may not have known it, but
Who has?
you may,
Did you guys know it?
did we know it? We've known it since the
I was
very
working for the
beginning.
town
Bob
when it
worked for the town
occurred.
and started.
I can tell you how it occurred, I can
That's-
tell you
that's
who was on
awesome.
the
That's
school
great.
committee back
So-
then.
So let me ask you guys this. I mean, this is not really a gotcha that I'm asking.
No, do you read any of the town reports? Do you read the reports that we put out every year?
Wait,
John.
we're getting off track.
Yeah, we are getting completely off.
Okay.
As a practical matter, probably if we had reported it properly back in 1993, the very first year under the Ed Reform Bill, the budget would have been $400,000 or whatever the number of teacher health insurance was, above net school spending at that moment in time.
Right.
Or because no, it would still have been net school spending because net school spending would have been higher.
All right, so, well, look, we have an issue of, in order to get through this year, you all believe you need 185,638. We have a scheduled meeting on June 14th among the three committees to talk about how do we do better planning in the town, grow the pie, that type of stuff. So I'd like to make a motion that the Finance Committee support at town meeting additional $185,638,000 for the school committee out of stabilization fund. With the premise being that on June 14th, we basically get to the point where we have real discussions and real ideas and real moving forward and not coming back again, basically any more times.
I just would like to amend that motion that we can't guarantee that we can't be back at this table
But
next.
the motion's of the Finance Committee, not to.
You can't guarantee that it's not
So
gonna be
that's a-
happening next year, because we're not
So,
gonna
Mr. Chairman,
implement.
that's the
something
motion
like
I
that.
have on the table.
I don't hear a second.
I'll second it.
Sorry.
Okay, any further discussion?
Now we can discuss it.
Clarification, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
General purpose stabilization?
I think it's the only one we can take it out of. We
Well,
have,
we can take it out of any one of them, actually.
we have municipal building, general purpose, and capital equipment. Those are the three stabilization funds. I think general purpose is the only one we can take it out of.
That's the,
Because certainly not municipal building, it's certainly not capital equipment.
So to Bob's,
But
yeah.
you can take money out of any one of them for any purpose. Even though
this
it's
is
called
true.
one thing.
However, Mr. Chairman, I just would like to remind the Finance Committee that we have allocated the building stabilization fund, as you pointed out, together with the capital needs improvement stabilization.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm putting the motion on the table so that we reach a decision tonight. So, now, our choices are, we vote on it, we have discussion on it, we basically adjourn, think about it, get back together, have more discussion about it, you know. But in terms of these folks and what they're basically asking for, that's why I'm putting the motion forward.
Okay, we have a motion, and is the motion to take the money from the general purpose stabilization fund?
Mhm.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We've had a lot of discussion. Is there any more discussion on it?
Do you want the neutral finance committee? Do you want the?
I'd love to know that the neutral finance committee exists, that's pretty
No,
awesome.
the irony is that of the 5 Finance Committee members, 2 are actually teachers. We are education biased. So,
And a-
I know that we don't come
And a
across that
third-
way, but.
And a third of the
yeah.
5 is a former teacher.
Yeah,
It's good to know.
I have 2 grandchildren in the system.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
I have 2 girls in the system, so we're right there, I'm right there with you.
All right, with no further discussion, all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed?
Okay.
Okay.
So, all good? before we
Well,
close
that-
ours, if
we'll-
you allow me to
we'll-
say one
we'll-
more thing.
We'll support it at town meeting, as we just voted, but, you know, don't get your hopes up.
Right. We don't always agree, and we will not, more than likely, always. And this is probably the last time we're having our joint meeting this budget season. But I have to say that this was a much better process than we had, despite our disagreements. This was a much better process than we had in the past. Probably one of the reasons for our disagreements is that, you know, we're looking at our funds and we're trying to see where they're gonna be spent, right? And hopefully this June 14th conversation is a beginning for us to really start looking in a different direction. That we neglected to look at,
You gotta figure out other
Long
sources of
time.
revenue. Public-private partnership is the only way.
I'm super excited about that. I just think it's exciting that there's an idea I've never heard it before, and so.
well, that may be the challenge, that if, you know, there is one example, for instance, up in
Greenfield.
Greenfield.
No, I
You
mean,
have
I
to
never heard
see-
it presented as an
Yeah.
idea for Granby.
So, right, and we're going down that road already, so we have Project Lead the Way, which is a public-private partnership for STEM education. We've applied and received a grant at
Yeah.
grade 6, but it's different because it's grant.
Yeah.
I'm looking for things like
Yeah,
you're
this is
talking
the-
about, which is building the partnerships. so
Building a
that it's
partnership, you
exactly.
charge money, you make a profit.
Mhm.
That's what we need to do.
And where's the entanglement there? And, you know,
Yeah.
we've been talking about developing Chapter 74 programming, so whether it's in STEM, you know, becoming vocational in a way
Yeah.
for our students, so.
I mean,
there's-
you mentioned earlier that you couldn't do it because of infrastructure problems, and that, but the irony is that in this day and age, your infrastructure for online education is pretty much nothing. It's pretty much all off the shelf at this point.
Right.
So,
Well,
It's just
that
the
may be it,
networking.
but here's an example for you guys. 2 years ago or 3, the librarian had her son in China, and as part of a class, this intercultural learning, they wanted to have one conversation with the person, and the network collapsed.
Mhm.
So I hear you. The amount, I mean, the amount that we're having in front of you is not.
I currently have a student
Yeah.
that I'm teaching,
Yeah.
basically in the graduate online program that I basically am in.
Right.
Uh,
Well, when you
He's a Top Gun. He's currently on the aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean. No problem participating at all.
Yeah.
In this day and age, the technology is such that you don't have those kind of catastrophes anymore, especially if you're doing it asynchronous versus synchronous. But
Right.
The
And
high
that's
school, in the
the-
high schools too, like,
that's-
I don't even think the kids are allowed to use YouTube because it crashes our network, our internet
Yeah.
at the school.
yeah, well, this is part of infrastructure build out. But you know,
Yeah.
that was just one idea for the school.
Yeah.
There's lots of ideas for the town in general.
If you can
We need to
attach
talk
that.
about this not from school versus town.
Mm-hmm.
We need to talk about that. It's the town, period.
We need to be on the same team,
That's right.
and then you guys can be neutral on the same team.
What color are we gonna wear?
Obviously blue. Obviously blue. Granby blue.
We have to wear the rough shirts?
If the school committee would indulge the treasurer a little bit here. I was just going over a couple of numbers on your summary budget, and if you could clarify a couple of things for me, if that's possible. You have estimated revenue for transportation, for example, just over 800,000, 813,000.
Yes.
Yet your expenditures are 766 projected. Is that 50 some odd $1,000 a contingency built into your transportation?
No, I believe it's special education. We have some changes in special education.
All right, so that's not,
Transportation, I believe.
the 766 is not the entire amount of expenditures, it's just their transportation. I got 766, 542 here, and you have 813, 542.
I believe, so, part of the transportation difference was the change in the contract that was negotiated and signed after FY18, and so there's an increase there as well.
Okay, so that's not reflected in your budget?
No, I think that is the reflection in our budget.
So then you have a $50 some odd $1,000 surplus.
From where?
13.
So 813, I believe, is all transportation, athletics, and special
Yes,
education.
that's all inclusive.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, you mentioned that if you didn't get your additional funds requested, you were talking about a first grade teacher, music, and JV sports.
And you added it up, didn't you?
I tried to.
I know you would, so hold on a second, let me grab the.
My question is not so much the exact knowledge, but my question is, JV sports, is that not part of the athletic special revenue or revolving fund?
It would be all the coaches. So it would be the athletic director, the assistant athletic director, it'd be stipends for coaches.
So those funds would come out of athletic revolving?
Part of those funds get in the operating budget.
Then I'm confused. Because that's what we have
So-
our athletic revolving fund for, for expenditures for the sports program.
So, I can't answer that question.
That's fine.
The
Yeah.
revenue might very well go down, revenue in the revolving fund might go down.
Right.
With less kids taking part in sports.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's user fee based is my point.
So the revenue would go down and the expense would be down. The question is whether it would be,
Well, I'm just
what the
wondering
relationship of the two is.
how that would affect out of the 185.
So when.
Well, there's 14,000 plus for JV 4, without including the assistant athletic director, that's what I remember from
Right.
your presentation. And there, there was an addition of the assistant athletic director and one more thing.
Well, you specifically mentioned
Transportation.
JV sports would be eliminated.
Yes.
Right.
But my point is,
I
I'm just
No,
trying to
that's a good
understand.
question, Steve. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that that's a bad question. It's just that, again, we got ourselves in trouble by saying that JV sports would be eliminated. Is that the top of the list still, based on your?
It's not top of the list, it's inclusive. We can't do really one without any of the others, so
So
it
it's
was
still on your
the.
list after?
Yeah, what does go away if the
Okay,
185
so-
doesn't get passed by the time?
My final question really, and we can come back to that, or you can get some information to me later, is fine. My final question would be detailed information on the revolving funds. You're budgeting $809,000 in estimated, $809,000 for total revolving funds for the ensuing year. My specific question is can you furnish me detailed information regarding all the revolving funds, whether it's athletics, school choice? You mentioned lunch, and that is actually my fundamental question. As I recall from the last presentation you made, you showed approximately a $16,000 deficit in school lunch for fiscal year 19.
We would not show 16,000, we'd show potential 10,000 because there's a contingency there. That's how we go into it. Correct me, Cheryl, if I'm wrong. Doesn't mean that it's gonna stay there. We don't really budget for that type of, that.
But the point is, yeah, you have
yeah.
at least a $10,000 contingency for school lunch. So my question on that particular topic is, what, if anything, have you discussed about trying to eliminate that deficit in the school lunch? And the reason I say that is that, as I mentioned to Cheryl earlier, just closed out April, and we have a significant deficit in school lunch as it exists today.
Right.
Even though I received grant money from feds today and from the state, which is $1.89, it still has a significant deficit for this current year.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm concerned about maintaining that deficit because that.
We are too. That deficit has been probably the biggest aggravation, even though it's not a huge amount in the grand scheme of things. That's been a major aggravation for us, and we're gonna continue to have those conversations. There's a new director who's trying to reduce that amount and bring it down to, no deficit. No deficit for them means about $15,000 or so, because $10,000 we have contingency, and then we get their management feedback based on.
Believe me, I understand
Yeah.
how difficult this is.
Right.
So that is not really something that we think is sustainable, and believe it or not, I mean, just, we're talking about our agreements here. Those conversations get very electrified, very heated, because it seems as if there is no you know, there's no way to get to that balance point, but we're looking for some conversations and some suggestions to bring it back down. Otherwise, we would agree with you that that's an unacceptable deficit.
The school choice money in particular would be very helpful information, because part of the problem that we're faced with is for the past 14 years, I guess I've been treasurer. I've had to borrow for short-term borrowing once, and that was my first year because there was a big mess up with the state payment coming in, and we were on a quarterly basis then, so that was a big problem. But what I do is I avoid, even though I budget all of $3,000 for short-term interest every year, I haven't used it. However, the reason I don't have to use it is because I'm very diligent about cash management in terms of, as you know, we pay our bills on time, all the time. But what helps me is the cash flow, in particular for revolving funds. I can use that money in short term to help pay bills.
Mm-hmm.
So if I get some detailed analysis, that would be very helpful to me, because I'm going to have a few $100,000 less this coming year to work with. And when $1 million goes out every single week, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, so if you do not receive a copy, first of all, of the multi-page document, that has some details around the
Projections.
revolving funds and the grants. We can talk beyond that. And probably starting July 1st, there will be more opportunity for Steve, for you, and Chris, and the Finance Committee to have more conversations around those. We're going to have a new business manager who will be on site.
Yes.
So one of the expectations is that that individual would be in constant contact with the town.
Looking forward to working with
Yeah, so do we, yeah.
And finally, in terms of the $40,000 for the network infrastructure in the junior senior high school, I found out about that today from Chris, and I certainly agree that ought to be done through the capital program. And whether or not we take it out of capital needs and stabilization or not, I think what I'll probably do is, we just authorize borrowing for fire department equipment and so forth. I'll delay the borrowing on that until I get resolution as to what's going on there, because even though it's only $40,000, I can certainly include that with my note issue for the other borrowing articles.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Did you want a rundown of the reductions still?
Yeah.
So,
Because
yep, it's in no order, it's a package.
I mean, this is a divided support from the Finance Committee, and the odds of it happening and being adopted by the town are pretty low, despite Finance Committee support. So what goes away?
So, it is a reduction in the lines to the superintendent and school committee for all of our professional development workshops, MASC coming in and doing training, that's $10,000. It is elimination of team leaders in all 3 schools of $12,942. We were doing that because the federal Title IIA grant was eliminated, and so we were putting it into the operating budget to cover it. That would come out. Team leaders are people who, we started instructional leadership teams, so in every building there's a leadership team of teachers with the principal that work to solve the instructional, they look at data, they analyze curriculum, and then they put interventions and things together for kids. So that's their work, or a big part of their work. So those stipends for those teachers would be eliminated. The infrastructure upgrade, the 2 teachers at Granby Junior Senior High School, which would, I'm working off of the 297, so just keep that in your mind as you're adding back there. So it would be 2 positions at Granby Junior Senior High School. It was a .25 reduction in instrumental music of $18,306. It was the elimination of JV sports at $14,583. It was elimination of 3 clubs. and that was at Granby Junior Senior High School of $1,820. The elimination of 7th and 8th grade advisors for $1,200. The elimination of the assistant athletic director, $2,369. The elimination of the grade 1 teacher at $58,000. Class size would go to 24. And then the special education contingency, which is the $10,323, which basically covers expenditures for students that may have a change in their IEP for equipment. That's what we use. So they may need a device, they may need a device repair, we might get a new student in, they might need some technology. That's the contingency we use for that. So that's
So the major
$297,000.
impact would be grade 1 and JV sports?
No, actually JV sports, people have asked when we presented this, why are there so many of these little, can't you keep the little, but if you add the little all together, it's a teacher. I mean, and that's what we're trying to protect is the core of the classroom. And so JV sports is $14,000. And then you could say it's also the assistant athletic director, so $2,300. But, and again, when we're talking about how do you build enrollment, JV sports, middle school sports, clubs, those are things that, no, but those were eliminated. Those are the things that people look for when they want to make a decision about where they're gonna put their kids.
Can I ask a dumb question? One of many for this evening. So, you go for the 185, because that's how the article is written. And so if that's voted down, we can't partially fund off of that 185, right? It's either all or nothing, because that's how the article is written.
Yep. Nope.
No,
No, the article isn't written.
Well, no, when it's written, so, well, that's what I'm,
We're not writing it.
The motion is gonna be for net school spending plus $505,000. And then you're gonna offer an amendment of however much money. But the town doesn't vote, well, we'll give you 20% of that or 30%. It's, you ask what you want and the town says yes or no.
okay. So it's essentially an
And
all or nothing.
we will
for
say, on a divided vote, support the amendment that you guys are asking for.
Theoretically, someone could amend your motion, cut it in half.
Right,
I mean, it isn't gonna be us, and it isn't gonna be you people, but somebody off the floor
right.
could do that, and then, in that way, you'd get something less than,
The big discussion is going to be, where does it come from? And, we're saying stabilization fund, and it's going to be, well, how much does that represent of the jumper of stabilization fund? And the answer is 50%. That's going to be a hard sell.
What does it say, how much is gonna be, what is it, 50%?
Well, it'll be 50% because
Well,
it
50%.
adds up to 250,000 out of 500.
Yeah, again, just, this was a great conversation, and I don't wanna leave on a seemingly down note, but remember, when we borrowed for the school building, $1 million we took out of general. We did not take the entire thing.
Well, yeah, we took out.
Yeah, we took the total was 2 million, 1 million came out of general. So when Bob said, you know what, for all purposes, these are our stabilization funds, and we can just transfer between the funds if you wanted to, and just, use it that way. There was more money in there, just if we get into the 50% of that amount, or whatever percentage is gonna be used, we took $1 million out of general stabilization fund to use for that building project.
To make sure it got voted. Affirmative. It was an attempt to make sure
No,
that
I'm
the
talking
vote
about
went
the
the right
source,
way.
not necessarily the amount, I'm talking about the source of it. So,
That's
yeah.
correct, it was 1 million on the building stabilization, 1 million on the general purpose.
Yeah.
But I would have to tell you that, well, a couple of things. First, I would strongly recommend that if you end up making a motion on the floor of town meeting, that you allow the first question to go through and then present your motion for an additional funding. So that you don't confuse the net school spending plus 505. So keep it as separate questions. But I'd have to tell you that, in all honesty, I probably will support the 185 out of general purpose, but if there's any attempt to take out of capital needs or building stabilization.
No, I don't think we would do that.
Yeah, I
That's-
would not support that at all.
Here's a question then, Steve, since you brought it up, and maybe you guys have a better idea. based on your suggestion, what I'm understanding is let the budget be voted as presented.
Right.
And then go for something. But if that article doesn't exist, doesn't it have to be an amendment to something that exists?
Well, you can check with the moderator, but I think.
But what happened last year is that an amendment was made, and then Ed Ryan suggested that we break it up into 2 votes.
Okay, that's,
And that's the thing I think that will happen this year.
okay, yep, that makes sense.
And the reason is that if it's 1 vote and people don't want to take money out of stabilization fund, then the whole budget is voted down.
Right.
And that really isn't anybody's intention. So you gotta be careful how the thing is presented. But I think what happened last year will be the way that they'll recommend it be
So you
done
try
this
to
year.
vote for the.
We'll vote for the
budget as is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but vote for the budget as
Get that in
is.
your pocket and then
Yeah.
vote for the.
And if anybody wants to amend the basic budget in a different way, then that's also a possibility. But we'll have to get Lynn involved with this so that she can control how that flows.
Right.
And there was no problem last year with that because they had to work it out there at the meeting. So, but I think she'll know this time that it'll be coming up. And so I don't anticipate that'll cause a problem. I wouldn't think.
Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all very much for your time. Have a great evening.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Steve, Jay.
I'm just listening.
Yeah, we're glad that you're here, listening.
This is your honeymoon period, Jay. Pretty soon you're gonna have a join in.
I thought I had it the first time at the select board meeting, the way that went.
Right off into the sunset.
Did you watch?
I don't have anything else for our finance committee. Do you have anything else? Okay, then I'll take a motion to adjourn.
It's an interesting time of year to.
So second?
all this. You know, too.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, good.